This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. First, the headlines. African Continental Free Trade Area formally starts. After discussions, meetings, delays, and several agreements, today is the day that Africa's formal trade agreement between countries starts. And before we wrap up the show, we'll touch base with NC4 to watch. Happy New Year and welcome to Business Edge. Now, it's the first day of 2021, and it is also the formal beginning of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The intra-Africa trading bloc has finally started after years of ambitious planning, negotiations, and despite the devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Chief Economist and Director of Research and International Cooperation, African Export-Import Bank, Hippolyte Fofak, said that the AfCFTA will strengthen the bargaining power of Africa in international trade negotiations, shifting the boundary of free trade for a more inclusive process of globalization. Wages should increase for skilled and especially unskilled workers in a shift towards a more inclusive growth model. The new commercial agreement is said to be capable of boosting Africa's economy to $29 trillion by 2050 from the current size of $2.6 trillion if properly implemented and executed across the continent. Expectations are high about the opening and reopening of more land borders to boost regional trade this week. It is expected that participants would address hiccups in the agreement's policies to optimize the benefits of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The agreement requires members to remove tariffs from 90% of goods traded, allowing free access to commodities, goods, and services across the continent. According to the IMF, the elimination of tariffs could boost trade in Africa by 15 to 25% in just the medium term. Once operational, the agreement is expected to create a $3.4 trillion economic bloc, connecting 1.3 billion people across Africa. This would make Africa the largest trading bloc since the World Trade Organization was formed in 1994. Now joining me on Business Edge is Andrew Mould. Andrew is the Chief Regional Integration and AfCFTA Cluster Regional Office for Eastern Africa of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, based in Kigali, Rwanda. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us once again on Business Edge.
You're welcome. Yeah, good morning and Happy New Year.
The same to you. So let's start the discussion by looking at the issue of tariffs, which happen to be one of the biggest obstacles to the movement and trade of interregional trade. Now, a uniform tariff was submitted for the East Africa community on December 2nd, 2020. This seems to be different from what was apparently agreed between ECOWAS plus Mauritius and CIMAC. What's your understanding of this situation concerning differences in the tariff issue?
Well, I think it's important to stress that countries have a certain liberty to choose, which tariff lines they're going to prioritize in terms of liberalization and which ones they will eventually exclude. You mentioned in your introduction that it's a 90% liberalization, but in actual fact, it's a 97% liberalization over the longer run. Countries have an additional 5 years if they're non-LDCs and 3 years if they're LDCs to complete the 97% degree of liberalization. So it's a very marked degree of liberalization. Regional blocs, I think it's a good way forward that they come with a common offer because that helps simplify things in terms of the negotiating. But of course, different regional blocs may choose different areas where they wish to exclude certain products from the liberalization. But the aim is to liberalize as much trade as possible under this. So,
Okay, so let's talk about trade some more. AfCFTA is expected to significantly boost African trade, particularly intra-regional trade in manufacturing. By 2035, the volume of trade exports should increase by almost 29% relative to business as usual. Intercontinental exports should increase by more than 81%, while exports to non-African countries would rise by about 19%. Now, these gains would come in part from decreased tariffs, which remain unfortunately stubbornly high in many countries in the region. And as we wrap up on this issue of tariffs, are we seeing the necessary policy adjustments being made to address this? Even as you said, countries have some respects and some room to play with in how they pursue the tariff lines. But for those who are really putting AfCFTA at the front and center of their economic policy, are we seeing those necessary policy adjustments?
Well, today, of course, is a historic day for the whole continent because it comes into action today. So we're going to see action in terms of the reduction of tariffs over the next 5 to 10 years, really. I think the main bulk of the process will be over the course of this decade. And countries have to make linear cuts, which means a proportional cut every single year. For a non-LDC country like Nigeria, of course, that would be over a period of 5 years. And for LDCs, it will be over a period of 10 years. So we will see a gradual reduction on the tariffs only on the intra-African component. I should stress that, because a lot of people are concerned about the tariff revenue losses. But of course, this doesn't impact on imports coming from outside the continent, only from within the continent. And because that's a relatively small share currently of total imports, it won't have major tariff revenue implications. But where it's going to have, I think it's going to be very noticeable, is we have a lot of regional economic communities around the continent, 8 of them formally recognized by the AU. And those regional economic communities, sometimes countries have not actually been applying the free trade agreements that they have amongst them. So, for example, within COMESA, we have countries such as Ethiopia and DRC, which are signatories and members of the COMESA free trade area, but they don't actually apply the free trade. Same in SADC, for example. Angola actually doesn't belong to the liberalization there. Now, under the AfCFTA, we should unblock those gaps, let's say, in the trading system continentally.
Okay, so let's look at some nationalistic tendencies and some protectionist movements we've seen. And we've seen those in the past few years across parts of the continent. We've seen them globally as well, in all honesty. We saw the levies on foreign traders in Ghana. We saw Nigeria's border closure, as well as South Africa banning foreign trucking firms as well. Going further, in the Nigerian instance, the government recently reopened 4 land borders, with others expected to be reopened soon. Do you think we've seen the end of these kinds of protectionist actions with the coming of the agreement? Are we going to see African leaders sit up and say, okay, we've put our pen to paper, we've signed our country to this agreement, we won't participate in this kind of protectionist behavior going forward? What do you think?
Well, that's a very good question, Tolulope. I mean, I think it's inevitable that in any regional process, you will get some trading tensions. This has happened, whether it's been in North America. NAFTA, for example, had tensions with Mexico over the trade of corn, for example. In the European Union, there were multiple conflicts, actually, in terms of agricultural produce, for example, between member states. So it is inevitable that there will be, localized disagreements in terms of, market access. But, we have to hope that these will be resolved quickly. We have the AfCFTA Secretariat now based in Ghana that helped to resolve some of these trading disputes that will inevitably occur. But let's just hope that they're kept to a minimum as the process moves forward.
I don't know if your hope sounds very sure there, because I feel like you are, as you said, anticipating that there's no way some of these things won't happen. But as you're saying, we hope that they're kept to a minimum. I'm not, what do you anticipate in this? Because many people, myself inclusive, believe that African governments, unfortunately, may not behave, and they will revert to the form of what they're used to doing. But this is supposed to be a new frontier, a new opportunity to raise people out of poverty on the continent, to include, to make sure that Africa is exporting and making money from that export, that we're also trading among ourselves. So I need a bit of more definitiveness in terms of if you're sure African governments will behave, and what are the structures in place with the agreement that should actually make them behave. I think that's another important part.
Yes, well, currently, actually, there's it's still under negotiation, the dispute settlement mechanisms and how these disputes will be resolved. But as I said, I think any regional bloc in the world has to confront this problem, and particular sectors, for example, which may be more reticent and feel that some of their interests are at stake. So farming is typically one where heightened sensitivities, and sometimes measures can be put in place to reassure those sectors that there are ways forward, I'm sure, as I said, just as there have been in other regional agreements elsewhere.
Okay, Andrew, we're going to take a time out. When we come back, we'll talk more about the positives that we expect to gain from the agreements coming on board, and also see where we might be anticipating any issues that might be coming, teething problems as it may be in the next coming weeks or a few months, and of course into the early years of the agreement fully kicking off. So stay with us. This is Business Edge on News Central. We will be right back. And still with me on Business Edge is Andrew Mould of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. We are talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement that kicks off formally today. Now, Andrew, let's talk about gains and positives now. We're hearing that freer inter-African trade would help women by lowering the gender wage gap across the continent, and would also help all workers by increasing decent employment opportunities. A growing manufacturing sector would provide new job opportunities, especially for women. One report estimates that compared with business as usual scenarios, implementing the agreements would lead to an almost 10% increase in wages, with larger gains for unskilled workers and women. So what other positives do we need to highlight for Africans across the continent as we move into AfCFTA formally kicking off over the next few weeks, the next few months, and of course the next few years? I'm Rwandan, I'm Kenyan, I'm Nigerian. I'm hearing about this agreement. How can I expect that it should benefit me personally?
Well, I think the first thing to stress would be that it actually goes beyond manufactured goods, merchandise goods. It actually includes services as well. And I think for a lot of African countries, there's a lot of areas of interest. So, for example, a country like Nigeria, its banking sector has already done very well at a Pan-African level, but could do even better, I think, under the service sector liberalization. They're going to be focusing initially on 5 service subsectors. And the hopes for employment creation there are very large. So, for example, there's one study in Eastern Africa which estimates that the creation of an East Africa single digital market could create anywhere between 1.5 and 4.5 million additional jobs.
Wow.
And I think for young people, this is particularly of interest, isn't it? These new service sectors, knowledge intensive, a lot of opportunities. There's also, of course, the free movement protocol, which thus far hasn't been signed up by as many countries as the AfCFTA itself. But the free movement protocol, I think, would open up a lot of opportunities for younger people across the continent in terms of the skills gaps that we see in some sectors in some countries. But a little bit ironic, because often you have neighbouring countries, that have a lot of unemployed graduates. Yeah. So I see a greater labour mobility of skilled workers across the continent will be a great advantage for young people and women.
Okay, I like this emphasis on young people, because that's where my next question is. You mentioned the creation of new jobs, and with the youngest continent and so many young people, about 70%, if not more, of Africans are young. They're looking for opportunities. They want to join the global economy. They want to be globally economically competitive. You mentioned the knowledge economy as well. Where are we looking in terms of the top 5 jobs you might suggest young Africans keep their eyes on as it relates to the opportunities that are coming from the agreement?
Well, I think in the areas, as I say, in the services, there's a lot of interest. So, for example, the priority sectors include areas such as tourism, ICT, finance, transport. So those areas should be particularly capable of generating a lot of new employment opportunities. In manufacturing, it's quite clear from all the simulation results that you were citing that it tends to be the more labour-intensive manufacturing sectors. So food processing, for example, is a big area of a big gain. Also, textiles and clothing. There's a lot of talk about, decreasing dependence on imported clothing, second-hand clothing, which has become a problem for many parts of the continent, and bolstering and having a regional value chain in clothing and textiles. So there would be, a range of skills available there, from relatively low-skilled workers to higher-skilled workers. As you say, from the simulation work, we know that lower-skilled workers stand to gain quite a lot in terms of increased wages. I'd also stress that the general public should be gaining also by downward pressure on prices. So that was the experience, for example, with the European Union, where you saw that the sectors that were most liberalised experienced the strongest downward pressure on prices. And of course, that's clearly got a poverty reduction implication, has a major one in terms of reducing the affordability, increasing the affordability, of many goods and services that poorer people commonly consume. So there's a lot of potential benefits.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question. I know it puts you a bit on the spot, but which of the aspects that the agreement is focusing on now are you most excited about? We know that general objectives of the agreement include creating a single market, deepening the economic integration of the market, establishing a liberalized market through multiple rounds of negotiations, which we've seen happen, aid the movement of capital and good and people, facilitating investment, move towards the establishment of a future continental customs union, and I find that very interesting, achieve sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, gender equality and structural transformation within member states, enhance competitiveness of member states within Africa and in the global market, and also encouraging industrial development through diversification and regional value chain, as well as resolving challenges of multiple and overlapping memberships. And we've talked about those regional blocks as well. But which one of these aspects, these general objectives, which one makes you the most excited for its potential for the continent?
My goodness, that is a difficult question. I mean, it's a package. I think it's very important to stress that, economies in the past in Africa have been handicapped by the balkanized nature of the economic structure. Small economies which trade very little amongst themselves, invest very little amongst themselves. And the AfCFTA should change that dynamic. Now, of all those things you mentioned, they're all very important. So although it has in its title the African Continental Free Trade Area, it goes far beyond free trade. It's about liberalizing trade, investment flows, and the free movement of people across the continent. Yeah, it's not a global liberalization; it's a selective one, only to Africa trading partners. So I see enormous potential, and our organization, Economic Commission for Africa, has always been lobbying and advocating for the putting in place of this unified continental market. It's been an aspiration for the continent, of course, since the Abuja Treaty back in '91. So it's a long-standing aspiration, and we're finally seeing it giving fruits with the coming into force today. So it's a very historic moment for the continent. I think people shouldn't be impatient. They have to realize it. I think as the last interview we spoke, it's a process. It's not an event. So it will take place over a period of a decade, but it should really fundamentally change trading and investment relations across the continent.
You've answered a bit of my next question, but I'll still go there because I want to know what to anticipate today and in the coming weeks. So this is something that has been in the works for a number of years. It was in 2012 that the African Union Summit finally agreed to create a new continental free trade area by 2017. At the 2015 AU Summit, they agreed to commence negotiations. So you had a series of 10 negotiating summits, and if not more, which took place over the next few years. With delays and all, the agreement is here. And many people believe that more gains would come from lowering trade costs by reducing non-tariff barriers and improving trade facilitation measures. So if I got to a border today, an African border today, and I wanted to do business somehow, can I anticipate any small measure of change today? When can we really believe or see that there's going to be some change at a border? Some trader who doesn't know so much about the agreements will get there and understand, okay, something is different. When do you expect that to be, even though you've asked us to be patient?
Well, as I said, I think in the tariff schedules, the reductions are linear over a period of 5 years for non-LDC countries. So that means, for example, if the existing tariff is a high one, like 20%, it will be declining over that period of 5 years, each year, by 4%. This year it would have, last year would have been 20%. This year will be 16%. within 2 years it will be 12. You understand? So it should start to become quite apparent in those kind of products where the tariff levels have been really high. I think it's important to stress, though, that the whole agreement is accompanied by additional trade facilitation measures, and there greater investment's going to be needed. So we have the BIAT, which is the boost in intra-African trade, which was actually agreed prior to the AfCFTA back in 2012.
Okay.
And it's important that that's fully financed, because we know that there's a lot of infrastructure gaps, and countries have been making big efforts over the last decade or so in terms of improving infrastructure. But that will be partly a catalyst for really helping intra-African trade and investment get to higher levels. So, there's a lot of trade facilitation work that will be needed. Development partners may be able to help with some of that. The African Development Bank, partners such as the World Bank as well. But we're going to have to look around for some new resources, I think, to actually really give that boost to the regional infrastructures.
All right, Andrew Mould, thank you. We spoke just a few weeks ago before this came up, and now we're speaking on such a historic day for the continent as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement formally takes off. As you said, we need to be patient. It is a marathon. We should see some of these things happening in linear movements from different countries as well. But we definitely will be touching base with you over the course of the next few weeks and months as more developments come around concerning the agreement. Thank you so much for joining me, and I say a Happy New Year to you once again.
Happy New Year to you as well. Yes,
I will see you later. All right, so we're wrapping up the show now, and we do that with NC4 to watch. And of course, these are a few shows we keep our eyes on as they develop business-wise. We are heading to the IDF, and we have a few bits and pieces of what they're saying for you. The United States International Development Finance Corporation has approved a $2.1 billion investment that will target emerging markets in Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Africa. The U.S. agency recently approved the investments for emerging markets in Africa, Eastern Europe, Indo-Pacific region, Latin America, and the Middle East. In sub-Saharan Africa, the DFC will provide $800 million to build a telecommunications network and data centers to enhance internet connectivity. The Kenya Civil Aviation Authority Director General Gilbert Kibi has disclosed that the national carrier Kenya Airways will consider closing its airspace to a number of airlines in response to a new variant of the novel coronavirus, which is reported to be up to 70% more transmissible than the current strain. The review of protocols will be done after government-to-government discussions. Nigeria's public debt rose to a total of 32.2 trillion naira at the end of September 2020, according to the country's debt management office. This figure implies that the country's debt profile rose by 1.19 trillion naira between the second and third quarters of 2020. And finally, Egypt's Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, Tariq El Molla, has disclosed that the high-octane petrol and diesel production complex in the governance, with a total investment of about $3.4 billion, will meet the fuel needs of Upper Egypt in the coming period. His remarks on this came during his inspection of the project's trial operations. And that's it for this edition of Business Edge. Follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also download our mobile app on Play Store and iOS. Just search for News Central TV. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Happy New Year to you and yours once again.